It started as just another ordinary day for 12-year-old Amara, a bright young girl who lived with a medical condition that required constant attention, type 1 diabetes. For her, managing her health was part of daily life. She carried her insulin kit everywhere, never letting the condition define her. Her family had planned a long-awaited trip, and Amara was thrilled because this flight meant she would finally get to visit her grandmother across the country. The family reached the airport early, checking in without issues. Amara clutched her backpack, which contained her diabetic supplies and a few of her favorite books. Her father, a tall, calm, and dignified man, accompanied her. He seemed like any other doting parent, guiding her through security, ensuring she was comfortable, and making her laugh to ease the anxiety of traveling. As they approached the gate, the airline staff smiled and scanned their boarding passes. Nothing seemed unusual. Amara was excited, staring at the massive plane through the window. She dreamed of sitting by the window seat, looking at the world below. She whispered to her father, "Daddy, can we sit together near the window?" He smiled warmly and promised her she would. When boarding began, they walked down the jet bridge, Amara holding her father's hand. Her heart raced in anticipation. But that excitement turned into confusion and then humiliation when a flight attendant suddenly stopped them inside the cabin. The attendant, with a firm expression, glanced at Amara's insulin pouch and whispered something to a colleague. Moments later, she said, "I'm sorry, but she can't sit in this seat. It's reserved." Confused, Amara's father replied politely, "We were assigned these seats when we checked in. Is there a problem?" The attendant crossed her arms and said coldly, "Passengers with medical equipment need to sit at the back. It's airline policy." Amara froze. Other passengers began to stare. She felt singled out, ashamed, as if she had done something wrong for simply carrying the tools she needed to stay alive. Amara's father could see the fear and embarrassment in his daughter's eyes. He knelt down, placed a hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "You've done nothing wrong, Amara. This isn't your fault." His calmness masked a deep storm brewing inside. He turned to the attendant. "My daughter is not a hazard, nor is she less deserving of the seat she was assigned. Her condition doesn't make her a second-class passenger." His words were firm but respectful. The attendant, however, seemed unmoved. "Sir, I don't make the rules. I'm asking you to cooperate." Her tone was dismissive, drawing more attention from curious passengers who were now watching closely. Amara gripped her father's hand, fighting back tears. She whispered, "Daddy, maybe we should just move to the back." But her father shook his head gently. "No, sweetheart. This is about more than just a seat. It's about your dignity." The tension in the cabin grew heavier. Some passengers murmured among themselves, some visibly uncomfortable, others frowning at what they saw as clear discrimination. One woman across the aisle spoke up softly, "She's just a child. Let her sit where she's supposed to." Still, the attendant stood firm, almost challenging the father to push back harder. But instead of raising his voice, he simply asked to speak with the captain. The attendant, visibly irritated, walked off to fetch him. Amara's father wrapped his arm protectively around her and whispered, "Sometimes, the world tries to make us feel small, but we don't let it. You are worthy, no matter what anyone says." His calmness gave Amara strength, though her young heart still felt crushed by the public rejection. Moments later, the captain arrived. Listened carefully, and though he seemed sympathetic, he ultimately sided with his crew, asking them to, please comply with the seat reassignment so the flight could continue without delay. Defeated but not broken, Amara's father quietly guided her to the very back of the plane, where the seats were cramped and uncomfortable. Passengers watched in silence, many shaking their heads at the injustice unfolding before them. The flight itself was uneventful, but for Amara, the emotional scar lingered. She felt humiliated and wondered why people looked at her differently just because she had diabetes. Her father stayed by her side, speaking words of encouragement, distracting her with stories, and assuring her that this moment would not define her. What no one on that flight knew was that Amara's father wasn't just any man. He was Elijah Carter, a billionaire entrepreneur and philanthropist, one of the wealthiest men in the country. Known for his quiet demeanor and preference for privacy, Elijah rarely flaunted his wealth. To him, being a father was his greatest role. He had built empires in technology and real estate, but in that moment, none of his achievements mattered. All he cared about was the pain in his daughter's eyes. He understood that money could buy comfort, but it couldn't shield her from prejudice or discrimination. When the plane landed, Elijah held his daughter close and reassured her. Sometimes people treat others unfairly because they don't understand. But when people cross the line, we have to stand up, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us. Elijah didn't raise his voice at the airline staff, didn't cause a public scene, and didn't reveal his identity on the spot. Instead, he quietly documented everything. Passengers who had witnessed the ordeal exchanged sympathetic glances and whispered among themselves, some even approaching Elijah later to express support. To them, he looked like a man with extraordinary composure. To Amara, he was her hero, even if she didn't yet realize just how powerful his influence truly was. The following week, Elijah made his move. Using his resources, he issued a formal complaint against the airline, accompanied by testimonies from other passengers who witnessed the discriminatory treatment. His legal team worked quietly but efficiently, preparing not just a complaint but a massive case that would draw national attention. Soon, media outlets picked up the story. Headlines blazed: "Young black girl with diabetes forced to back of plane." Social media exploded with outrage. Hashtags trended. Thousands of people shared their own experiences of being treated unfairly while traveling with medical conditions. The airline attempted to issue a half-hearted apology, claiming it was a misunderstanding of policy. But Elijah wasn't interested in empty apologies. He wanted systemic change. Behind the scenes, he invested millions into advocacy groups supporting diabetic children and launched a foundation dedicated to protecting the rights of medically vulnerable passengers. When Elijah finally spoke publicly, he did so not as a billionaire, but as a father. Standing at a press conference with Amara by his side, he said, "No child should ever be made to feel less worthy because of their health, their race, or their circumstances. My daughter's dignity was questioned that day, and I will not let it happen again, to her, or to anyone else." The world listened. His words resonated far beyond aviation. Parents, activists, and even lawmakers rallied behind the cause. Airlines began reviewing their policies under public pressure. Some even announced new training programs to ensure sensitivity toward passengers with medical needs. Amara, once humiliated in front of strangers, now stood proudly beside her father as a symbol of resilience. She wasn't just a little girl with diabetes anymore, she was the face of a movement that demanded respect, dignity, and equality. Months later, the incident had transformed into a turning point. Airlines around the globe adopted stricter anti-discrimination measures, ensuring that passengers with medical conditions were treated with compassion. Elijah's foundation expanded rapidly, funding research, support groups, and travel assistance programs for families with diabetic children. Amara herself began speaking at events, sharing her story not as a victim but as a survivor. Her voice carried hope for others, reminding children with diabetes that they were not defined by their condition but by their strength and courage. In interviews, Elijah often downplayed his billionaire status. He insisted that any parent in his position would do the same. But those who knew his story understood that it wasn't just wealth that gave him power, it was his unwavering love for his daughter and his refusal to accept injustice silently. The flight attendant who once dismissed Amara likely never imagined that her actions would ignite global change. The airline, after facing legal consequences and public backlash, issued a sincere apology and committed to lifelong reforms. For Amara, the memory of being denied a seat still lingered, but it was no longer a wound, it became a badge of strength. She told herself, "If I could go through that and come out stronger, I can face anything." Her father smiled at her one evening and said, "That day on the plane was painful, but look at you now. You turned humiliation into empowerment." Amara replied with a determined smile, "Maybe that's what it was meant to be, Daddy. Not just for me, but for everyone who will never have to go through what I did." And with that, what began as an act of discrimination ended as a legacy of change, one family's strength reshaping the future for countless others.